It was the last weekend of summer, the kind of weekend that carries the warm smell of grass and sunscreen, and the faint echo of laughter that still lingers in the air long after the people have gone. For a group of 4 friends, Jake, Mia, Sam, and Lily, it was the perfect opportunity for a little adventure. They had heard rumors of an old fairground on the outskirts of town, abandoned for decades after a series of mysterious accidents and strange disappearances. Most people in town stayed away, claiming it was haunted or cursed, but for these 4, the danger only added to the excitement. They arrived just as the sun was dipping low behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of deep orange and purple. The fairground sprawled before them like a skeleton of its former self. Rusted rides leaned slightly to one side, their paint peeling and colors dulled by years of neglect. Torn banners flapped softly in the evening breeze, whispering secrets no one could hear. The Ferris wheel stood tall against the twilight, its metal frame groaning faintly in the wind. It was beautiful in a way that made your stomach tighten, a perfect mix of nostalgia and unease. The friends crossed the broken gate, careful not to step on scattered shards of glass and broken wood. Jake held a flashlight, its beam trembling slightly as he swung it over the shadowy outlines of the fairground. Mia carried a small digital camera, the kind that recorded both video and audio, eager to document the night's adventure. Sam and Lily followed close behind, exchanging nervous glances but refusing to admit they were scared. The air was thick with a strange stillness, like the world had paused and was holding its breath. As they moved deeper into the fairground, the creaking of old rides under the wind seemed to echo like footsteps behind them. They passed a carousel, its horses frozen in mid-gallop, eyes wide and painted smiles faded. Lily reached out to touch one of them, and the paint flaked off under her fingers, falling to the ground like dusty confetti. For a moment, a chill ran down her spine, and she caught a fleeting glimpse of something moving in the corner of her eye. She blinked, and there was nothing. Jake laughed nervously. "It's probably just the wind," he said, though his voice didn't sound entirely confident. They continued toward the Ferris wheel, its skeletal frame looming over them like a silent guardian of the past. Sam shined his flashlight on the ticket booth where broken glass littered the floor and the faded sign still read, "Fun for everyone." The irony wasn't lost on them. As they explored, Mia started recording, narrating lightly for the camera. "We're at the old fairground. It's creepy, but kind of amazing. I can't believe this place is still standing." Her words were casual, but there was an edge to her tone that betrayed a hint of fear. She panned the camera slowly across the empty rides, the shadows stretching long and dark in the dim light. Then it happened. At first, it was subtle, a faint whisper, so soft that it could have been the wind. They stopped and looked around, but the fairground was empty. The only movement, the swaying banners and the skeletal horses of the carousel. The whisper came again, this time a little clearer, almost like someone calling a name. "Jake," it said, just barely audible. Jake froze. "Did you guys hear that?" he asked. The others nodded, faces pale. Trying to brush it off, they pressed on, walking toward the roller coaster. Its tracks twisted high into the air, rusted and broken in places. Mia raised the camera, focusing on the dark shadows that seemed to crawl along the tracks even though there was no one there. As she played back the footage, they noticed something that made their blood run cold. Faces. Faces that hadn't been visible when they were filming, appearing suddenly in the frame, pale and distorted, staring directly at the camera. What is that?" Lily whispered, stepping back. The group huddled together, shining their flashlights over the same area. Nothing, just empty air. But on the camera, the faces remained, watching them. Their expressions were twisted, almost hungry, and they seemed to move slightly when no one was moving in reality. A sudden creak from the Ferris wheel made them all jump. The ride began to move slowly, though there was no one there to operate it. The chains rattled and the cabin swayed gently. The wind picked up, carrying with it a chorus of faint, incomprehensible murmurs. Jake swallowed hard. "Maybe we should just leave?" he said, but his voice trembled. Mia kept filming, unable to stop herself. "We need to see this through," she said, though even she sounded unsure. They moved toward the funhouse, its mirrors cracked and warped. Inside, their reflections were distorted, but there were moments when the reflections didn't match their movements exactly. Lily reached out to touch a mirror and recoiled as her reflection smiled at her, even though she wasn't smiling.
It was the last weekend of summer, the kind of weekend that carries the warm smell of grass and sunscreen, and the faint echo of laughter that still lingers in the air long after the people have gone. For a group of 4 friends, Jake, Mia, Sam, and Lily, it was the perfect opportunity for a little adventure. They had heard rumors of an old fairground on the outskirts of town, abandoned for decades after a series of mysterious accidents and strange disappearances. Most people in town stayed away, claiming it was haunted or cursed, but for these 4, the danger only added to the excitement. They arrived just as the sun was dipping low behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of deep orange and purple. The fairground sprawled before them like a skeleton of its former self. Rusted rides leaned slightly to one side, their paint peeling and colors dulled by years of neglect. Torn banners flapped softly in the evening breeze, whispering secrets no one could hear. The Ferris wheel stood tall against the twilight, its metal frame groaning faintly in the wind. It was beautiful in a way that made your stomach tighten, a perfect mix of nostalgia and unease. The friends crossed the broken gate, careful not to step on scattered shards of glass and broken wood. Jake held a flashlight, its beam trembling slightly as he swung it over the shadowy outlines of the fairground. Mia carried a small digital camera, the kind that recorded both video and audio, eager to document the night's adventure. Sam and Lily followed close behind, exchanging nervous glances but refusing to admit they were scared. The air was thick with a strange stillness, like the world had paused and was holding its breath. As they moved deeper into the fairground, the creaking of old rides under the wind seemed to echo like footsteps behind them. They passed a carousel, its horses frozen in mid-gallop, eyes wide and painted smiles faded. Lily reached out to touch one of them, and the paint flaked off under her fingers, falling to the ground like dusty confetti. For a moment, a chill ran down her spine, and she caught a fleeting glimpse of something moving in the corner of her eye. She blinked, and there was nothing. Jake laughed nervously. "It's probably just the wind," he said, though his voice didn't sound entirely confident. They continued toward the roller coaster, its tracks twisted high into the air, rusted and broken in places. Mia raised the camera, focusing on the dark shadows that seemed to crawl along the tracks, even though there was no one there. As she played back the footage, they noticed something that made their blood run cold. Faces. Faces that hadn't been visible when they were filming, appearing suddenly in the frame, pale and distorted, staring directly at the camera. What is that?" Lily whispered, stepping back. The group huddled together, shining their flashlights over the same area. Nothing, just empty air. But on the camera, the faces remained, watching them. Their expressions were twisted, almost hungry, and they seemed to move slightly when no one was moving in reality. A sudden creak from the Ferris wheel made them all jump. The ride began to move slowly, though there was no one there to operate it. The chains rattled, and the cabin swayed gently. The wind picked up, carrying with it a chorus of faint, unintelligible murmurs. Jake swallowed hard. "Maybe we should just leave," but his voice trembled. Mia kept filming, unable to stop herself. "We need to see this through," she said, though even she sounded unsure. They moved toward the funhouse, its mirrors cracked and warped. Inside, their reflections were distorted, but there were moments when the reflections didn't match their movements exactly. Lily reached out to touch a mirror and recoiled as a reflection smiled at her, even though she wasn't smiling. The town of Willow Lake had always been quiet, almost painfully so in the late summer. Streets that bustled with children playing in the early months of the season now lay empty, and the local shops had begun to shutter for the coming fall. It was the weekend of the annual summer festival, a tradition that marked the last warm days before school and routine returned. The festival itself was small, just a few tents, a small stage for bands, and a few food stalls lining the edge of the lake, but it was a highlight for the townsfolk, the final celebration before the calm of the approaching autumn. The lake shimmered in the late afternoon sun, a perfect mirror reflecting the sky above. Families strolled along its edge, children dipped their toes in the water, and teenagers gathered in small groups, laughing and joking with each other. Among them was 16-year-old Emily Harris, a bright-eyed girl with a curious streak that often led her to places she shouldn't be. Emily had always been adventurous, the type of teen who explored the woods behind the school or stayed out late to watch the stars, even when her parents warned her not to wander too far. As the festival began to wind down and the sun dipped closer to the horizon, Emily wandered toward the lake's quieter side, where the reeds grew thick and the water lapped softly against the shore. She said she wanted a moment alone, just to enjoy the calm before leaving for the evening. Her friends teased her gently, but let her go, calling after her that they'd be back soon. Minutes passed, and the laughter from the festival seemed to fade behind her, replaced by the soft rhythm of water against the reeds. That's when she thought she heard it. A whisper, so faint at first she almost dismissed it. "Emily," it said, carried on the water, almost like a reflection of the wind. She paused, her heart beating faster. There was no one there, only the lake and the rustling of the reeds. She shook her head, telling herself it was the festival noise and her imagination playing tricks. But the whisper came again, clearer this time, curling around her like smoke. "Emily, come." The voice was soft, melodic, almost hypnotic, but there was something in it that made her stomach knot with fear. She stepped closer to the water, drawn by a curiosity she couldn't resist. The surface of the lake rippled gently, reflecting the last golden rays of sunlight. And then, just as her foot brushed the edge of the water, it felt like the world shifted. A chill ran through her bones, and a shadow moved beneath the surface, long, fluid, and impossibly fast. She gasped, stepping back, but the whisper continued, luring her closer, promising secrets hidden just beyond sight. By the time Emily's friends realized she had been gone too long, panic set in. They called her name, their voices cutting across the lake, but there was no response. The festival goers started to gather near the water, worried expressions replacing smiles. Someone alerted the authorities, and soon the local police were searching the reeds and the shoreline, flashlights piercing the growing darkness. No one found Emily. The town of Willow Lake, small and close-knit, was thrown into fear. Parents warned their children not to stray near the water, and whispers of the lake being cursed began to circulate. Over the following nights, townspeople reported seeing shadows moving near the edge of the water, dark shapes that didn't belong to any person. They described shapes that slithered along the surface, like smoke given form, always retreating when approached. Dogs barked incessantly at nothing, and the wind seemed to carry voices that sounded suspiciously like Emily's, calling to anyone who dared to wander too close. Emily's disappearance remained unsolved, but one detail made the case more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. Her diary, found weeks later, hidden in her room, revealed entries that hinted at something that had been watching her long before the festival. She wrote of strange dreams in which the lake called her name, of shadows lurking just out of her corner of vision, and of whispers that promised to reveal secrets if she only listened. The final entry was unfinished, ending mid-sentence. "I think it wants me to." Authorities found no evidence of foul play or any rational explanation. The lake was searched thoroughly, divers scouring the waters for any sign of Emily, but they found nothing, as if she had simply vanished, swallowed by the calm surface of the water, leaving only ripples behind. Months passed, and the story of Emily Harris became a quiet obsession for some, a whispered tale shared only in shadows. Amateur investigators and paranormal enthusiasts traveled to Willow Lake, hoping to catch a glimpse of the strange phenomenon. Footage captured on handheld cameras showed movement in the reeds, flashes of pale shapes just beneath the surface, and faint, incomprehensible whispers that seemed to echo across the water. Some of the recordings picked up figures emerging from the shadows, only to vanish when approached, leaving nothing but silence.
Locals began leaving small offerings at the edge of the lake, candles, flowers, and notes addressed to Emily, hoping to appease whatever force lingered there. Some claimed that at night, the surface of the water would shimmer unnaturally, almost like a reflection from another world, and the whispers would return, soft and beckoning. The lake had become a place of fear and fascination, a silent predator that watched and waited. One summer evening, a small group of teenagers dared to return to the spot where Emily was last seen. They recorded themselves walking along the shore, joking nervously to hide their fear. At first, everything seemed normal. The gentle lapping of the water, the call of distant birds settling in for the night. But as they reached the reeds, the camera picked up a faint shimmer on the lake's surface, and a voice, almost imperceptible, called one of their names. "Liam." The teenager froze. His friends laughed nervously, but their eyes darted to the water. The shimmer grew, like moonlight dancing on moving silk, and a shape emerged, long and shadowy, stretching across the lake, moving with an unnatural grace. The camera shook in panic as the group ran, the whispers following them, urging them back. They never returned to that part of the lake after that night, and the footage they captured remains one of the most chilling pieces of evidence in the Emily Harris case. Investigators who reviewed the footage noted strange anomalies, faces that appeared in the water for only a fraction of a second, figures moving just out of the camera's frame, and audio that revealed whispers calling the names of people who weren't there. The conclusion was impossible to explain. Something not human was watching, something patient and intelligent, something that had claimed Emily and might still be waiting for others. Locals, when pressed, refused to talk openly about it. They would glance toward the lake nervously, their voices dropping to a whisper. Children were warned never to stray near the water after sunset. Teenagers dared each other to approach the edge, but most refused after a single step. And those who lived nearest the lake often spoke of hearing faint voices in the night, soft enough that no one else could hear, whispering names that made their skin crawl. Emily Harris never returned. Her disappearance became part of the town's dark memory, a story whispered during late-night campfires and recounted by parents warning their children to respect the lake. The place had become more than a body of water. It had become a presence, alive with intent, waiting silently beneath the surface. And for those who had dared to get too close, the echoes of Emily's whispers were never far away. The lake remained calm by day, serene and reflective, but at night, the water held a secret darkness that watched, waited, and called. Visitors, investigators, and locals alike all knew the same truth. Some places are not meant to be understood, and some forces cannot be stopped. And in Willow Lake, The shadow of Emily's disappearance lingered, a reminder that the quietest waters can hide the most terrifying depths. Those who survived encounters near the lake rarely spoke of them, but the message was clear. The water does not forget, and it does not forgive. It waits, patient and eternal, calling softly to anyone who will listen, promising secrets, offering curiosity, and delivering only fear. The whispers never stop, and neither does the watching presence that claims those who listen too closely.
It was the last weekend of summer, the kind of weekend that promised warmth, quiet, and a chance to escape the city's noise. For Mark and Elena, a young couple in their mid-20s, it was the perfect opportunity to rent a small cabin tucked deep in the woods near Pine Hollow. They had found the listing online, complete with charming photos of rustic wooden beams, a stone fireplace, and a small lake glimmering just beyond the trees. It seemed idyllic, the sort of place where they could relax, forget the stress of work, and spend a few days together before the busy fall arrived. The drive out to the cabin was long but scenic. Pine trees stretched endlessly on both sides of the narrow road, their branches swaying gently in the late summer breeze. The air smelled of earth and leaves, warm and familiar, yet carrying a hint of something older, almost forgotten. When they finally arrived, the cabin looked even better than in the photos. Sunlight slanted through the trees, painting golden patterns on the wooden siding, and smoke drifted lazily from the chimney, although no one had been there before them. It should have been inviting, but as Mark and Elena unloaded their bags, a subtle unease settled over them. "It's perfect," Elena said, trying to shake the feeling. Her voice was light, but her eyes scanned the tree line instinctively. Mark laughed and ruffled her hair. "It's just the woods. Nothing in these trees will hurt us," he said, though even he felt a flicker of apprehension. They brought in their belongings, set up their small camera on a tripod in the living room, and began unpacking. The camera was meant to document their trip, just simple footage of the cabin, the lake, and their weekend together. But from the moment they powered it on, the lens seemed to capture something more than just light and shadow. In the first shots, a faint dark shape lingered in the corner of the frame, indistinct but unmistakable. Elena pointed it out. "Did you see that?" she asked, her voice tense. Mark leaned over the camera and squinted. "Probably a shadow," he replied, though the unease in his tone betrayed his words. They shrugged it off and continued with their day, telling themselves that the angle of the sun or the movement of the trees must be responsible. As night fell, the cabin took on a different personality. Shadows stretched across the walls, the fireplace cast flickering light that danced like specters, and the wind outside made branches scratch against the windows like fingers. Mark and Alana had dinner and tried to relax, but the camera remained set up, recording quietly in the corner. When they reviewed the footage, a sense of dread gripped them. The dark shadow was still there. Every shot, every angle, it appeared, a tall, shadowy presence standing just out of reach, always in the corner of the frame. Sometimes it seemed to move closer, sometimes retreat, always observing, never entirely visible. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The first night was restless. Elena kept waking to the sound of faint footsteps, the creak of floorboards above them, though the cabin only had one floor. Mark dismissed it as the settling of the old wood, but even he felt a tight knot of fear in his chest. When they checked the footage in the morning, the shadow seemed sharper, more defined. And in one clip, as Elena had turned her head to speak to Mark, the shadow's face appeared briefly, pale, featureless, and horribly human-like, staring directly at the camera before vanishing. Over the next day, the unease intensified. The couple tried to ignore it, going for walks in the woods, swimming in the lake, and pretending everything was normal. But the camera followed them everywhere, capturing moments they didn't remember noticing at the time. In the living room, while Elena read a book, the shadow appeared behind her in the frame, tall and looming. On the deck, as Mark grilled their dinner, the figure stood just inside the cabin, silent and unmoving, before disappearing once he looked directly at it. By the second night, the fear was tangible. The wind outside the cabin carried low, almost whispering sounds, the kind of noise that made you question whether it was in your mind. Doors that were locked seemed to shift slightly, creaking open and closed without explanation. Lights flickered briefly, casting long shadows across the walls. Every time they reviewed the footage, the shadow seemed to be growing bolder, appearing in more frames and moving closer to the camera. Elena tried to sleep, but the sensation of being watched was overwhelming. She dreamed of the shadow, standing silently at the foot of the bed, its face always obscured in darkness. In her dream, she felt its cold presence on her skin, and when she woke, the room was empty, but the lingering sense of dread was unmistakable.
The final night of their stay, they decided to pack up early the next morning. They didn't speak much, the silence heavy with unspoken terror. As they reviewed the footage one last time, the shadow did something new. It moved toward them. In clip after clip, it advanced, just enough to be noticed but never fully revealed. Its presence seemed intentional, as though it had been waiting for this moment. When they left the cabin, the air outside felt lighter, almost normal. The sun rose over the tree line, casting warm rays across the forest. But as they drove away, Elena noticed something on the rearview mirror's reflection, a dark figure standing at the edge of the trees, watching them leave. She blinked, and it was gone. They thought the ordeal was over. They returned to the city, unpacked their car, and tried to return to normal life. But it wasn't over. The footage they had brought back revealed something horrifying. The shadow had followed them. In their apartment, captured only on the camera when no one else could see it, the figure appeared in corners, behind doors, and sometimes reflected in mirrors. It never moved closer in the physical space, but the camera recorded it as though it were always just behind them, watching. At night, the whispers began, soft, low, unintelligible at first, growing clearer over time. Elena awoke to hear her name called in the darkness. Mark saw shapes move just beyond his vision. Lights flickered inexplicably, doors creaked, and cold drafts swept through rooms that were sealed tight. The sense of being watched was constant, suffocating, unrelenting. They tried to leave, but the shadow persisted. Friends who visited briefly saw nothing, and skeptics dismissed the couple's fears as paranoia, but the camera never lied. Every recording, every playback showed the figure in the background, a presence that defied explanation, a darkness that was patient, intelligent, and malevolent. As weeks passed, Mark and Elena's lives became consumed by fear. Sleep was difficult, meals were quiet, and their conversations were always interrupted by the creeping dread of being observed. They began to understand one terrifying truth. The cabin had been only the beginning. Leaving it did not break the connection. It had followed them home. The shadow was not just a place, it was a being, tethered to their presence, persistent and patient. It watched, waited, and whispered promising secrets that came with unbearable fear. The camera had captured its existence, proving that their terror was real and that it was impossible to ignore. Some nights, they would sit together in silence, reviewing the footage, seeing the shadow move subtly in corners of rooms, in mirrors, and behind closed doors. Other times, they simply sat in the dark, listening to the wind outside, hearing faint whispers that seemed to echo their own names, repeating endlessly. Mark and Elena realized that this was not a temporary haunting. It had followed them home, and they had no idea why. The cabin had been a doorway, and now the doorway
had come with them. Their lives had changed forever, their peace shattered by something that existed just out of reach, visible only through the lens of a camera, but felt in every fiber of their being. Even when friends came over, laughed, or tried to bring light into the apartment, the presence remained, patient and silent, observing, waiting for the next moment to make itself felt. The couple had learned that some darkness does not end when the source is abandoned. Some shadows linger, persistent and patient, and some cameras capture more than just images. They capture the watching, the knowing, the horror that cannot be escaped. In the end, Mark and Elena understood that their lives would never be the same. The cabin had been the first encounter, the beginning of something far older and far darker. Leaving it behind did not free them. The shadow had followed, and it was patient. It watched, it waited, and it would never let them forget. Even now, if you watch carefully, the footage shows it, a dark, silent figure lurking in corners, moving just beyond comprehension, a presence tethered to the lives of those who dared to see it. And as they learned, sometimes the scariest thing is not what you leave behind, but what leaves you.